All right, I'll just blur screen.
Okay.
So there we are. Is that better with the untidy background?
No, that's fine. That's absolutely brilliant. You look great. Thanks, Oliver Percival, for coming and joining me today on this interview leading up to the Shine celebration in August. It's 45 speakers for 45 minutes, 45 interviews in 45 days. You are the 15th.
Oh,
Yeah. So thank you for coming along. And how are you today?
good, good. Yes, yep. Been another interesting day. We'll be able to touch on a few relevant topics. And I guess you've invited me here to talk in general, I understand, but my main hat is the 5G. One, have I got a main hat? Depends what day it is. Movement, uh, the putting hands up to sort of try and halt the 5G and say let's be a bit more reflective and think about it before rushing headlong into another industrial hazard, industrial pollutant disaster. Um, and with all the other attendant risks and hazards that come with it, not just the health ones. And for me, that campaign is not. It's not about anti anything. It's not about against. It's about um, people being encouraged to ask the right questions and to inform themselves about technology before they engage with it. Too direct, too head on. Uh, because there's so much we don't know about stuff that's just brought out at full speed with a lot of excitement and fanfare, and we just need to stop and say, what is EMF? What are electromagnetic fields? What is the radiation associated? What are microwaves? What happens if we use them not just to heat our food, but to communicate with? Because there's an awful lot that hasn't been communicated about that. So it's about informing and then being able to, with that greater level of information, make choices in life that mitigate the harm that can come from overexposure to a hazard such as that. So I'm starting down the EMF path. That's one hat. We could also touch on other things like emerging technologies, being sort of over unity energy production, or sort of life force energy based health systems, or just the old fashioned ways to or hacks to maintain and preserve health that have been suppressed. The lost century again, isn't it? Even in health, not just technology.
Well, let's start with the 5G and EMFs. Have you had any real world experience of this technology and in a kind of a laboratory situation? Is that something which you've come across?
Not in a laboratory situation, although I have talked to, because I like to contact the industry as much as possible, which is nearly impossible. But I spoke to a guy at Sussex University who is a 6G engineer, and just as a friendly conversation, because I like to hear from their point of view, what it is, what this technology is, how it works, and it's just to try to establish the truth or otherwise that what the phased array systems are compared to the omnidirectional systems which hitherto have been used. So the omnidirectional is where the radio wave just goes everywhere, like a TV signal or radio signal, and it's called radial. So it's like drop a pebble in the pond and the wavefront goes everywhere, and wherever you are in that wavefront is where you'll pick up your message. Whereas the phased array is where it points it just to your device and not to anybody else's. So that's in some ways more efficient, but in other ways, it enables them to use a little bit less energy on each particular message, but a lot more energy in blasting thousands of them, millions of them around instead of dozens in the past. So I talked to him about that, and also if he was aware of anything to do with health consequences of having we know that the health effect is from the pulsed modulation and the polarization of the signal. That's really the bottom line. So to expand on that, natural electromagnetic radiation is naturally depolarized, which means that the vectors are going in all directions. So it's completely sort of out of phase. Whereas a man-made signal is naturally polarized. The electric and magnetic fields are going like this, but really only on one or two axes. They're not spinning randomly. So that makes a very clear and distinct signal as far as the body is receiving it. And the other thing, the pulse modulation is a bit like the Chinese drip torture, where to shape and to mold the wave so that it carries distinct bits of information in its waveform. It's made unnatural, and so the body is receiving these pulses, which is like a woodpecker, and that causes a stress response. It's really that simple, and that's been demonstrated in the lab. But these engineers in their labs are not aware of this. They're not thinking about biology. They're only thinking about technology, which is fair enough. I understand people are in silos, but the world is so complex now. It's really time that all these different silos did come together and start talking about their different fields of expertise. Is that this trend towards polarization and specialization is actually really damaging, isn't it? It makes people experts in one tiny bit of the elephant, and they don't see the whole elephant. So lab-based, yeah, I haven't done any work, but yes, I've spoken to a few engineers, and they've confirmed that it's all healthy and that it's very clever. It is very clever stuff. I give it to them. 5G, 6G, the faster the frequencies, the more incredible the technology has to be able to receive information that quickly and decode it and pass it on to the phone or convert it to audio. It's super clever, but yeah, we shouldn't be rushing into things. We should have learned that lesson by now. And other lab-based, no, but it might be a good point to just say my interest in this, in the 5G, the EMF field, is as an architect. So that's my day job. And I first came across, the idea of healthy buildings about 20 years ago. And at the same time, I was doing geomancy training. And that's to do with geopathic stress, it's to do with ley lines, and the slightly metaphysical or non-physical field effects in a house. Can be psychic effects as well, ghosts and so on. And at the time, Bluetooth and modems, sort of Wi-Fi was fairly new. This was back in 2002, 2003. And so I asked the group then, can we look into this and see if we can understand if there's going to be any health effect from the incoming microwave generation? The conclusion then was, well, no, it seems to be okay because it's really low power. Bluetooth was very low power. And I suppose the messaging was more like 2G back at the time. So it was just transmitting text messages, not high definition videos, which is a much more complicated data stream. So at the time, we kind of went back to sleep on it, really. And then it was not until 15 years later, when my son was at school and being bathed in all this stuff suddenly, and I happened to watch Sasha Stone's film called 5G Apocalypse. It's like, with an open mind, because I'm not sure, I'm sometimes not sure about his output, but it was brilliant. For me, it was a real game changer. So that and what I saw school doing was like, oh my God, you better get back into this. And as a day job, clients' houses and schools and so on, it's important that the unseen environment is also kept healthy. So it's not just about building materials or outgassing. It must be, the conversation has to include electromagnetic pollution. So this is just building on knowledge from the 60s and 70s when the effect of the low frequency fields was being looked at. So that means the sockets, and so the magnetic and electric fields from sockets and house wiring, and also the high voltage overhead transmission lines. That was all learned about. We've actually forgotten what we learned, or even about that, but it's because it does have an effect on the body. The 50 hertz, 60 hertz signal from the low frequency fields does have an effect on the body. And a lot of us sit and sleep right next to sockets. But have we adapted to that? Who knows? We do see chronic health issues becoming way more prevalent. And it's obviously an effect of all the cocktail of toxins that we are exposed to these days, from injections to chronic low frequency exposure, and then now the chronic high frequency exposure, plus industrial toxins and pollutants. So it is all a perfect storm, of course. It's very hard to distinguish or isolate one particular cause. So as an architect, yes, it's important that people should be mindful about the wireless environment, the electromagnetic environment. Having said that, pretty much zero client is interested in it.
Yeah.
So, I feel it's my duty, because of what I know, is just to introduce them to the idea. If they want to run with it and use Ethernet and make stuff, use stuff in a more aware way, then that's great. If they don't, it's their prerogative. Maybe we're wrong.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I fell asleep next to my mum's router a couple of years ago in her living room, and I woke up with the most horrendous headache. I was about that far away. Yeah, I know. And I had a terrible, I mean, it felt like my head was on fire. And I went to the doctors. I think it was the last time I went to the doctors, actually. And he just completely blanked me when I said to him, I fell asleep next to my mum's router. It was like it didn't even, that wasn't even a factor in this horrendous headache I had. I don't know in your experience, but it seems that in the medical world, that's not a consideration, that there is, this electro smog, as they call it. What is your take on that it's not being accepted? And is there any body, government body or otherwise, that actually assesses these things and says this is what happens when you've got this particular frequency? I mean, is there anywhere that actually does that, and it just rolls out reports on these different technologies? Is that not the case?
No, they all just reproduce the statements issued by the main body at the moment that it gets listened to by officialdom is called the ICNIRP, so the International Council on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection.
Yeah.
The fact that it has to exist does show that you do need protecting from non-ionizing radiation. But the problem with their model is it's based on only thermal effects. So it's only the capacity of microwaves to heat your body tissue. That's the only criteria that they measure and recognize. And so their guidance is then adopted by the Public Health England back in the day, and UKHSA have just adopted that as well. So any government around the world basically refers to them. It's
Is that updated? I mean, is that like every 4 years? Is it like, there's something came out in May 2020? Is it that sort of thing or not?
Yeah, well, periodically. It was last reviewed in 2003.
2003.
Yeah.
That's a long time ago.
So the next
we didn't have smartphones then.
Exactly. Well, it's still using the criteria defined by the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission in America, from 1998. So they really haven't updated stuff since then. But in fact, 2020, they did reissue their guidelines. But the guidelines hadn't looked at new science. They were just sort of tweaking a few things. And there was no substantive evolution in them, not in the favor of the population anyway, just to allow a little bit more leniency with the industry. But the review that's coming up is World Health Organization, the IARC, the organization who advised the WHO. And in 2024, the whole radiation issue is up for re-examining. So there've been a few big name defectors from the IARC commission or committee. One of them is James Lynn. So he'd served with ICNIRP actually for a long time, and he's come out very strongly against the current guidelines, saying they're really not fit for purpose, because he recognized that they don't cover the non-thermal effects. And so he's really, really calling loudly for the IARC to properly review the evidence for 2024. And in his opinion, and many others, well qualified to have opinions, they say it should be reclassified, this microwave radiation, as a class 1 carcinogen, which means a definite carcinogen. At the moment, it's a class 2B, which means that it's a possible carcinogen. 2A is probable, 1 is definite. But it is known, even by our government, it is known that there's enough evidence to show it's a definite carcinogen. Politically, that's a massively hot potato. So whether the WHO do come out and say this is now class 1 will be very interesting to see. That does change the dynamics somewhat for the industry.
It seems that the industry has invested billions, if not trillions, in this technology, and it clearly is not in their interests to start putting, laser type warnings on the back of all their products with the little symbol. I mean, people like Vodafone and Ericsson and all these people, are they, do they have their own health kind of guidelines that they give out? I mean, is that a thing, or how do they do that?
Those examples, and also the main phone maker Apple and the BlackBerries, what are they called, the other not Apple one, Android.
Yeah,
they've all got the packaging, they've all got on their software under the licensing and under general information, they've got the legal bit, and that says we're not guaranteeing this is safe if you use it anywhere near the body. It's varying between 5 and 12 millimeters. They say basically if you're holding your phone, then we're not liable for any health issues that might arise. Right. Or so they've completely disclaimed themselves. But the other interesting development is that the management companies, the management agencies that talk about the share values and the shares and the investors, so the investor reports being published by Vodafone and Ericsson, they are advising that they should set money aside for future claims, which could affect the shareholder value, because one day there will be a tsunami of liability claims against the telecom industry.
A bit like the cigarettes.
Yeah, exactly the same.
Exactly the same scenario.
Once the dam breaks, then they know. The analysts know, and they're warning them that this is going to be big.
Yeah, well, that's a kind of a sad situation to be in, that they actually know and they're carrying on. But I mean, I watched Richard Vobes' video the other day, and he was talking about solutions. And just tell us some of your ideas on how we should be using our phones. Just give us a little, best practice.
Yeah, yes, and exactly that's as important as anything, because this stuff is here to stay. I in some form or another, isn't it? Like it or not. Same with AI and the advent of so-called progress in any generation. So that's why information is important, and there are very basic things which I wasn't aware of until 5 years ago, which are for phones. People don't realize that you should, at night time, you can turn them off. Now, some people do just for some social reasons, but just for health as well. Put them on to at least airplane mode. It still receives, it's still a passive receiver of GPS satellite tracking, but it's not emitting information as an airplane mode. And also the modem in the house, to turn that off at night. These are the basic hacks, and everybody can do that. Really, unless in communal houses, it's harder because people have different patterns. They like to have Wi-Fi in the night sometimes. But you just need to do what's possible. And turning Wi-Fi off it can be the power switch, but the modems don't usually like that too much if it's frequent. But most routers, except BT, you can do it on the Smart Hub Manager. You can just turn it off on the laptop at night and then turn it on again in the morning. It's remote. The remote.
And with your phone, is it good to use headphones or your speakerphone? Is that something which? Yeah,
I think they're better. That's much better. Yeah, headphones. There are air tube headsets where the rest is the acoustic goes through air tubes, but the transmitter is here, kind of at chest level. And I was never quite sure about that. The transmissions from here, and it's then coming the rest of the way by air. how clean is that? But I haven't bought a pair yet to measure with an acoustimeter, which are the devices where I've got one.
Yeah. The other thing as well is that people wearing these AirPods now, and you were
Very,
mentioning Bluetooth, but they are very bad, aren't they?
it's yes, it's Bluetooth, but it's the inverse square law is relevant. So the closer you are, the more intense the radiation with the square law drop off. These are right inside your ear, and they're not just receivers. It's not a Sony Walkman. They're transmitting and receiving. There's a handshake all the time,
Yeah.
and whatever the mechanism, you can measure it with one of these devices. Just hold it to the ear and see. There is a field, and it's right close to the inner ear, in the middle ear and the brain. So I think there's going to be the boiled frog syndrome on that. And in time, there's going to be some fallout.
Yeah. And do you know much about the technology in cars? Because I've heard recently that, especially electric cars, we've got these huge, great batteries. What kind of field are they emitting? If like a Tesla or a Pyrrhus or something.
The field is actually more about the magnetic field. So in electric cars, there's an induced magnetic field every time the speed changes. It's very hard to shield magnetic fields. So they're very measurable within an electric car. And it's been known for a long time that pulsing magnetic fields are carcinogenic. They're not a good idea over a long period of time. With everything, but
so should Teslas carry a health warning?
I think they should.
Yeah.
I had some car companies did do some research, and then they kind of kept it quiet.
Yeah.
But the other main feature in electric cars is all the electromagnetic control systems as well.
Yeah.
They're literally wireless now, literally cable-less. So everything loomed up the car front and back to lights and everything, all the sensors, it's all cableless.
Wow.
So it's an electro-smog little pod, really.
Yeah. So I mean, just talking about energy and cars, the whole, I mean, we could talk about Just Stop Oil and that climate change thing, but let's just park that. But I watched the Lost Century by Stephen Greer recently, and that was about free energy. That it's been a topic amongst some of the social media groups for quite a while now, and obviously there's Stan Mayers and people before who've talked about these sorts of things. If we had free energy, then we wouldn't have the need for these cars, and obviously the pollution that caused by these cars would go. Are you in that field at all with the free energy?
Yeah. Yes, for about the last 8 years. So I had a little period working for the Kesh Foundation. Have you heard of the Kesh Foundation?
No.
He came out in 2013 in public. He's a nuclear engineer, Mr. Kesh. He's quite a controversial character, even for me, and especially for me as well. Still, having worked for him for a year, probably maybe more controversial. He came out publicly 10 years ago with this technology, which he called plasma technology, which was working basically, in other words, with the ethers, with the hyperphysical or the non-physical fields that manifest into matter state, into what we call physical life. And he promised breakthrough in levitating cars, in airships, in over unity power production and collection, and also health, the applications in health where these etheric ether fields or plasma fields could be used to rebalance the body, and also with agriculture, the same principle. So if imagine you go up the pyramid in nature, the more subtle you go, the higher up the pyramid, the more foundational that the source of energy or information is. So if you can tap in higher up, you can then apply it to way more things. Whereas if you're tapping in at the bottom of the pyramid, you can only apply it there. So it's kind of self-evident that if you go to the more original forces, and you can create the asymmetry that allows those forces to express in the physical world, then you can apply them to agriculture, to medicine, to power, to whatever we need. So I sort of sharpen my teeth there, if you like. So, but I've kept in touch with the industry. I left it after a year. We still make health units, or what we call wellness, wholeness support units, using the focused ether fields or life force fields. That's under a different hat with Orinoco, with a Y. But I've had discussions this week even about progress with over unity power generation, and learning that, yeah, there are people that around the world who have, as we heard with Stephen Greer, who have nailed this. The guy I've spoken to recently, has really nailed what Mr. Kesh was promising. We didn't necessarily find sustainable solutions with Mr. Kesh, not yet, but this other group have, and it becomes very clear with what I've heard from Greer this year, the lost entry, but also his press conference in Washington a couple of weeks ago, which wasn't just about the extraterrestrial technology in terms of visitations and ships and intervention with the military. It was also, as you know, about medical devices and about clean energy devices, which has always been his interest as well. And it seemed it was really much more tangible, wasn't it, what he was able to share now? And it feels for me as well with other conversations, this stuff, the 100th monkey in a way has got his banana now. Like the critical mass and disclosure seems inevitable. Yeah. This group I've been talking with very recently, has actually made this stuff and has agreements with different countries and with different organizations to make stuff that just works. The implications, it works basically for cars. It's a battery, but not in the sense of heavy 10-kilogram lithium stuff. It's just the people who are coming up with this stuff have got really light touch energy storage devices, which are constantly self-replenishing from the ether. Whatever mechanism, there are several ways to do that. And that means they can hold a charge for years, and they can be recharged in minutes. It's a massive paradigm shift. And you can apply that to houses, you can apply it to big businesses like Google's. I'm sure Google have got this already.
Yeah.
They must have.
Yeah.
But the applications are endless. You can apply oil tankers, everything. So it's very exciting. This stuff is really within reach now. We just need a few inventors, like the ones that are a bit more known about, to be able to work with people who have integrity, work with people who are trustworthy within the teams and are not going to be pulled down by greed or profit, any of that. That's what has bedeviled the previous projects, as Greer has told people as well. That's what projects. So we have to hope that the consciousness has also reached that critical mass of just desperately wanting to share this without personal gain.
That's it.
But we don't need much.
No. Stephen Greer calls it crazy inventor syndrome.
Yeah.
And it's like what he's really saying, and he said this repeatedly to people when they've approached him about how to go to market. He said, just open source it. You have to just get it out into the public domain and then work with it. And those people who haven't, who's like me, oh, I want the billions, I want, the big ego and it's all mine. They either get knocked off or get bought out, or it gets shelved, or they get taken to court. There's all sorts of obfuscation that goes on with big business who have got an agenda to keep these things off. But it seems to me that you're right. I think that there is it's a bit like whack-a-mole, isn't it? There's going to be one that's just going to pop up and it's going to all be over. It was interesting when I watched the Stephen Greer documentary. It is a game changer in terms of the whole dynamics of the way the human race works. If they've got free energy, it is profound, the effect, because it wipes away so much of the heavy density of fuel, basically, because batteries are heavy, fuel's heavy, coal's heavy, etc. And also the idea that you put a certain input into a machine and you can't get more out is actually a complete fallacy.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the chap that you're talking about, he's managed to do that, and that's why it works so well. It'd be great to come back to you in a few months' time or a year's time and see whether it's come out.
Stuff can be shared and shared information-wise, also shared practically, like blueprints. Yes, the more people that can get blueprints and just run with it, then, like you said, it's just unstoppable. And really, and these ether technologies are not that complicated, because again, the further you go up a pyramid, spiritually, mentally, the simpler life gets. So you don't need all these complex electronics. It doesn't need to be difficult.
I don't know whether you've heard of this, but I came across a website a couple of years ago that had these huge magnetic generators, and they're commercially available. Have you heard about these?
Well, yeah. Well, there are various. A lot of the prototype stuff was magnetic generator based.
Yeah.
Well,
I can't remember the name of the company. When I saw them, I'm like, this is incredible. They had 3 models, and they were like $2,000, $4,000, $8,000 for these. What would be the equivalent of a generator?
Well, that might be the one I bought, thinking it was real, and it wasn't.
Well, I was just wondering whether you come across it, because there seems to be a lot of chatter, in inverted commas, about different, etheric devices, and whether you come across anything that was actually commercially available right now. And you see a lot of the memes where people start up these magnetic motors and they just run. I guess they're just very, very simple versions of more complicated ones that we're going to get to produce more wattage.
Yeah, I think it's such a circus, that whole.
Yeah.
So a friend has been actively traveling the world for 6 years until COVID, with funding to test these claims. He said he'd seen over 100, I think over 100 different devices in that time, and he was trying to match investment with inventors. And he totally came across the crazy inventor syndrome as well. Very frustrating. But even out of those 100 devices that he came to test, rigorously to see if there really was true, sustainable, usable output for a load, only about 5 worked. So, but even one black swan is enough to disprove the current paradigm. They'd find it wanting. So he found 5, but then all the other factors kicked in. The inventor was like, "Oh, yay, I really have done it." And then they get more possessive. All the investors coming in suddenly become greedy again, having been looking very philanthropic and spiritual. So one by one, they fell victim to those influences. But it's fertilized the ground, and now it seems the groups one's hearing of these days seem to be much more viable. So no, I still don't know where you can buy something that's market ready, but I do know people have stuff that's working. So it's just under the surface, isn't it? It's just float. It's that flotsam.
It is.
Soon it will pop up.
It's in its plasma stage, isn't it? It's kind of just becoming. I've always thought that crowdfunding. I've always thought that would probably be the way forward, and have a management team that runs the crowdfunding. In my mind, when I thought about free energy before now, and actually, releasing the plans to a certain degree, or having, trade shows or meetings, and then actually crowdfunding it. I don't know what you think about that, but some sort of open source, open community exposure would help. I don't know.
The famous one from 2015-ish was the quantum energy generator, the QEG, which is how actually a lot of the group I'm with, we met around that topic. And they did a crowd fund, and it was all very exciting, and you could buy the blueprints, and you could all team up on Zoom and start building enough of them around the world, there'd be too many for the authorities to stop. But again, it turned out to be not necessarily scam, but a heck of a lot of wishful thinking. They were running before they could walk. They promoted these blueprints, which had not been tested and proven to work, even by themselves. But they were hoping it was going to work, and started selling it before it was ready. So that again just gave the industry that world a bad reputation. I think they're still selling the blueprints, saying we're not quite there yet. The problem we're a week away. We're going to be part of the original teams. There's a lot of that hopium, decided or not, that's really put people off the scent.
Is it?
You need the proof of concept, I think, for people to genuinely get behind something. If you put proof of concept out in public, and it really is proof of concept, then until now, people have been in danger doing that. So, as Greer said in his report actually a year ago, it's very tricky.
It's an interesting natural balance, isn't it? It's a natural balance. I mean, talking about core of etheric energy, do you have any thoughts on the Tartarian thing that's been going around, and these buildings that are pulling, electricity out of the ether, and also the electroculture, which is quite clearly, demonstrable it works. And I have seen diagrams recently that say, 3 meters does this, 6 meters does this, 15 meters does that. Is that something, what do you think about these kind of hidden history ideas of these buildings pulling in electricity?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Electroculture itself, I have adopted to try that this year. It seems to be very much on the tip of people's tongues. So you're at Venus this year, I gather. So that's copper. So it's interesting it's coming to the fore. And Steiner and Schauberger, all early proponents of the value of copper as a metal that didn't demagnetize the soil. So that's been known about for 100 years. And its paramagnetic and its dielectric qualities. So it's temporarily magnetizable and temporarily will conduct electricity. So if you imagine that ether, Steiner said that electricity was corrupted ether, or is corrupted ether. So in other ways, it's a step down in matter to materialism of the etheric force, electricity. And that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? It's like it's the water, and the ether is like the gas. Is the higher state. So the electroculture seems to be conducting that ether or the electric forces from the atmosphere to the soil, in the words of the people proposing it. And whatever the physics, there do seem to be some good results. It's too early for me to know what's happened here, but I do know that in Secret Life of Plants, that amazing book from the 70s, it was discussed then because it was being done in the 50s. So it's nothing new. But I put the kibosh on it, didn't they? It's
just as a little exclusive for you, I've got this chap coming to the Shine celebration called Buster, and he's a really, really interesting guy. You might or might not have heard of him. He's been around for a long time, and he talks. I saw a little YouTube video of him, and he was talking about how when the rain falls from the clouds, it spins in a vortex, and when it hits the ground, it charges the ground, which was fascinating to me. That was a fascinating idea, and he's a great exponent of copper tools, and he actually says that iron tools, spades and forks and pickaxes, they damage the soil, but if you use copper tools, it actually charges the soil and it doesn't damage the soil. These kind of I do this talk, and at the beginning of this talk, I talk about these esoteric ideas just coming out now, because it seems there's a lot of hidden knowledge or extreme, like very powerful natural knowledge coming out, and just rising to the top and becoming a normal thing. But Buster, he was talking. I spoke to him on the phone, and he said, "I've never used anything but copper tools." So, it is coming out, and the electroculture thing down at the farm in South Bristol, one of the projects down there, they've started doing some experiments with electroculture.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, it is a thing, and I'm just interested to see this year's crops are going to have some effects. You know, I think they've done a row of without copper and a row with copper. So let's see what happens there. But I mean, in terms of the buildings and stuff, I don't know, but it seems to me that there was definitely a lost technology where these buildings were pulling in from the ether. And you know, clearly Tesla proved that anyway, didn't he? So, you know.
Well, there may well be. I'm a bit on the fence with Tartaria stuff. There's some massive anomalies to be discussed in terms of this the architecture, the beauty and the grandeur of stuff that was created so recently, and we've totally lost the skill and context for that. But the conductivity, I don't really know. Lightning conductors, yes, we can understand what they do. But all the copper domes and finials and ornaments on buildings, I guess, yes, they would be conductive. Whether it was for that reason, I don't know. Because they don't turn that DC voltage into usable current per se. But there may be, the etheric charge, the ether charge arising from being from that environment, and you could inhabit that, is probably health giving, yes.
Mm.
I don't know how one would measure that.
No.
Sensitive and feeling that.
There is. Have you been to Wells Cathedral at all?
Yeah, the other day.
Did you go into the octagon room?
Yes.
See, it's interesting because I asked the librarian there what that was for, and he said it was for the squire and the lord of the manors going in there and talking about their crops and having a kind of communal government type building. And when I walked into it, I was like, well, this is a healing chamber. I just walked in and I thought, this is acoustically, it's a healing chamber. And why would they have a pillar in the middle of the room if you want people to see each other? It wouldn't. It seemed to me like it was a magical acoustic chamber that if you had different frequencies in there, it would reverberate and actually heal you. Because I personally believe that moving forward, that sound is going to be one of the big healing modalities. But yeah, I don't know what you think about that, and what was your experience when you went in there, because it's a magical room.
Yeah, it's got those ideas didn't occur at the time, but a friend, Tom Bree, has just written a massive opus about Wells Cathedral and all the what's it called, Cathedral in Cosmos in Stone, which is about all the sacred geometry and the astrology, all the more esoteric influences. I don't know what he touches on that octagon room, but sound. I was with a kinesiologist yesterday, and he said that he's just been experimenting with using a metronome to reset the body. So bacteria, pathogens, whatever imbalance, he was using a metronome, and he tried it on me, and with kinesiology, the body responded. It was like, yep, fixed. And then he would put that frequency from the metronome into his sort of bioresonant device to charge the water, which is the supplement you come away with to charge water. And so the water would just hold that frequency of sort of 108 hertz, for example, and you take those drops and the body gets that information field, job done. So he was really excited about that. He's a sort of master energy worker, but to him this was like, ooh, that's even simpler. So not even the herb and not even the supplement. As an energy frequency, just the metronome, just that physical frequency.
It certainly seems to me that is where going to be one of the modalities. And whenever I have a sound bath, and I do like sound baths, I just feel so flushed afterwards. It's you sit there and you have the gongs and the singing bowls, and especially when the singing bowls get going. I don't know whether you've ever been around those singing bowls, but they just give off this huge ripple, and it definitely, it's another electromagnetic field, isn't it, in a way? Not electromagnetic, but audio.
Yeah. Question. Yeah, it's another way of expressing nature's qualities as sound. Yeah, or light, or whatever. All these things, different ways of expressing number. And so I like to think about them as your blueprint. So they're the tuning fork, and you are being introduced to the perfect pitch. And your body knows that, it has a memory of that. It has our blueprint holds that. So it's just to bring us back into focus.
Yeah, I like that. I had an email off a guy who wanted to come to the celebration, and he said he wanted to bring his Rife machine along. I can't find his email.
Oh.
It's really frustrating. But wouldn't that be great to have a Rife machine there?
Well, we talk about those today, actually. The thing with Rife machines is that you need to have the correct diagnosis to get the right frequencies.
Yeah.
Get the right diagnosis. Whereas with the Lakosky coil, for example, the multi-wave oscillator, or there are other methods that can produce, say, or light therapy. You're producing, or the gong bath. You're producing an overall field of multiple influences, and that will catch whatever you need. Whatever you need will be caught in that and reinformed by that. The multi-wave oscillator, by definition, is giving you everything, and what you need can be taken from that. Whereas Rife needs the 10 codes that match your pathogen. So it's a brilliant idea, but maybe it's it's Achilles' heel is that.
It's the diagnosis.
I've always called the Rife machine, that's electrocution or electrobiotics, which isn't much better to antibiotics. Because in the end, you want to change the terrain. You don't want to just kill the bug. You want to change the reason the bug is there. Because it's just in its habitat. It's not being naughty. It's just where it wants to be. So change the habitat, the ecosystem, and then the bug demanifests. Isn't this amazing? The pleomorphism in the blood that you can see from live blood. Bacteriophages and rods and stuff just appear as the life force decays from the red blood. These other pathogens appear because they're nature's way of cleaning up. Where from? It's amazing.
That's
deep. The pleomorphism. It's just extraordinary.
I think the power of nature is coming forward, isn't it? It's just exposed. It's being exposed, and we're resonating with the power of nature. And as these things come forward, people are kind of getting hold of it and running with it, and it just seems there is a consciousness awakening at the moment to finding things. Well, I think it's partly to do with the kind of the allopathic harshness of the medical industry, if you will. Just the sheer brutality of our present system, and people are naturally veering away from it and looking at different modalities and more gentle and more subtle. And I know the word holistic is overused, but actually looking at the whole energy field, as well as the physical, as well as the psychic, the spiritual, the emotional, and treating people on all those different levels, as opposed to just popping a pill, which people are clearly, not, well, a lot of people are not doing that anymore. So, Oliver, you know what? We've come up for our time, I'm afraid.
Right, it flies by.
Yeah, I know, it really does. And I've really enjoyed talking to you. And what I've said to the other speakers is, if you'd like to come back after the celebration and do a talk and give us an update on where you're at, and maybe we can talk about some projects that you're, more personal projects you're involved with. And I'd love to find out more about the free energy, because I'm excited for the free energy, and especially with Stephen Greer's work, because he's been a powerhouse for years, 30 years, 25 years, whenever it is. And this last chapter, the Lost Century, just really does bring it home that these things are capable, and they're absolutely real, and they are going to come out. So do you have any last thoughts?
Well, my optimism with free energy, so to speak, even free in many senses, of course, over unity, but also free economically, what it should be, is that it won't necessarily give humanity a financial leg up, because I think the financial interests will just find another way of making life more expensive. So the savings we make on not buying petrol and oil and electricity will probably be made up for elsewhere. But for the planet, I think it's incredibly exciting, and for general consciousness of what's possible with physics and biology. Because for the planet, definitely, whatever we think about carbon or climate, we're definitely messy. and our fuel sources, renewable and fossil, are both disasters in terms of planetary sanity and health. So yeah, it's brilliant. It would be brilliant for that, which is really good. And so the ecosystems can certainly benefit, and our curiosity can be piqued. And many people might start questioning other things when they see that this wasn't such a sacred cow, the laws of physics. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for spending some time with me, and I really look forward to seeing you in a few weeks now, a month's time.
Yeah.
And I look forward to your talk. So thanks for being with us today.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Eli.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.